Dr. Steiner, welcome.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ranking Member Murray, members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. I direct the Education Policy Center at Johns Hopkins University. I also serve on the Maryland Board of Education and previously served as Commissioner of Education for New York. The opinions I'll express are just my own. I hope to convey three core messages. First, ESSA's promise of flexibility does not provide states with a license to fail historically underserved students. They're deeply deserving, they are deeply underserved. Secondly, ESSA includes several guardrails to support student success. While some student plans, such as the three represented by their chiefs here today, include very promising and highly innovative policy, it is difficult to assert that all aspects of approved state plans have fully met ESSA's requirements and the spirit of the law. Finally, while state leadership is vital, federal oversight of ESSA is critical and required under the law. The promise of ESSA was that it would liberate states to craft education policy sensitive to the state's different contexts and visions. While ESSA does give states back much freedom, the law does not give the states the freedom to fail our millions of underserved students. There are critical federal guidelines that must not be ignored. By fail, I mean drastically reducing students' life prospects by providing an education we know to be inadequate. If every state had superb educational achievements and only modest achievement gaps, then indeed it would be a mistake for the federal government to place constraints on state policies. Universal high performance, however, is far from the case. An analysis from the National Center for Education Statistics found that our lowest performing states managed to provide a mathematics education essentially equivalent to those in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Armenia. Because Congress has recognized this reality, you included guardrails to ensure that states, districts, and schools were held accountable for the performance of all students, and you empowered and required the Secretary of Education to ensure compliance with the law. I want to say that in several cases, the department's feedback on ESSA's plans has helped ensure that states meet their obligations. For instance, some states combine subgroup performance together into super subgroups, thus potentially limiting support for the most disadvantaged students. The department appropriately required each subgroup to be included in state plans before they were approved. In other cases, it is difficult to assert that all aspects of approved plans have met the spirit of the law. For example, the statute requires states to identify schools for targeted support and improvement if one or more subgroups is consistently underperforming. Some states have defined consistently underperforming so vaguely as to leave us wondering how they will identify them at all. A large number of states have conflated ESSA's requirements to identify schools for targeted and additionally targeted schools into a single definition, thereby limiting the number of students and schools that will receive support. In my judgment, the department should, in fidelity to ESSA, be scrutinizing this issue more closely. For students of low-income families and students of color, ESSA also requires state plans to describe how the state will ensure that those students not be served at disproportionate rates by ineffective, out-of-field, or inexperienced teachers. All of us know that this is a critical issue, yet this is one area where far too many states are offering small, piecemeal policies and remedies at best. ESSA requires states to support low-performing schools with evidence-based practice. Indeed, evidence-based is referenced almost 60 times in ESSA. The current Secretary of Education removed reference to evidence-based interventions from the ESSA state template, thus sending a particular signal. Lastly, under ESSA, states are required to only utilize regular high school diplomas to calculate graduation rates. Because the ESSA state plan templates do not require states to define their singular regular diploma, different groups of students are in fact subject to vastly different graduation requirements within the same state. I encourage continued oversight on the part of the department to these issues. Last year, in my own city of Baltimore, over 1/3 of last year's high school graduates received their diploma, their high school diploma, having failed the standard state requirements. They were given an alternative route, a bridge project that almost none of them failed. Maryland, sadly, is not alone in offering these diverse pathways with different academic rigor. This is why ESSA matters, and this is why attention to legislative detail matters. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Dr. Steiner. Senator Young.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. White, thanks so much to you and to the other panelists for being here today. I wanted to turn to some of the innovation you've done in Louisiana with respect to career and technical education. In my home state of Indiana, we recognize the importance of CTE as part of a broader, well-rounded education. And we want every Hoosier student to have access, whether it's through a charter school or a public school, to these programs. So our state plan, which is currently under review, emphasizes the diverse needs of all our students and that well-rounded approach to success. In your opinion, and based on your experience, how do career and technical education programs set students up for success in today's economy? And if you could kindly explain the importance of preserving and increasing access to these sorts of programs, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I think the benefits of quality career and technical education are manifold. One is motivational. Second is the ability to validate that students are leaving high school with skills that are transferable into higher education and in some cases directly into the workplace. The key, and I think Indiana has done quite a lot of work on this, is to make sure that indeed the education is verifiable and that it hasn't sacrificed essential skills that employers also value in literacy, mathematics, and others. Not every student needs to take calculus, but every student does need to have a fundamental understanding of calculation, algebra, and every student needs to be able to read. If a student is educated in that way, career and technical education can do wonders for creating a diverse skill set that allows them to be viable in higher education. The key is ensuring that that is validated by an industry-based credential and or college credit upon graduating. If we do that and restore the dignity of career and technical education, which has long had a stigma perpetrated against it, we can provide great opportunity for many kids.
So what I'm hearing is career and technical education hasn't always been perceived as a rigorous discipline. It can be rigorous, and embedded within it can be essential life skills and areas of knowledge that we can instill in these students that decide to go the CTE route. That has to be the case, in fact, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In Indiana, we also, as so many other states, are focused on career pathways, making sure that there's a direct link between what you're learning and then real-life experience. So we embed in much of our educational curriculum real-life work experiences and also allow our students to gain industry credentials. And I know we're increasingly seeing that across the country. In the 2014-2015 school year, over half of Hoosier students concentrating in CTE programs graduated high school with an industry credential. Again, that's over half of our students that concentrated in CTE programs. In your view, what role do these industry credentials provide to both our students and the needs of our workforce? And do you have any ideas to help increase momentum, as it were, in this area?
Yes. First, industry-based credentials allow us to validate the quality of the curriculum, and oftentimes, for better and for worse, we have a more rigorous, nationally normed validation of career and technical skills, be it in the craft trades, be it in information systems, than we do in the academic field. So first, it allows us to validate that what was taught was learned. Secondly, it provides a basis on which students can graduate high school and move on, hopefully with college credits. Strong industry-based credentials should be transferable into the higher education system for credit or into the system of employment. So it provides all of us comfort that what is taught actually is measurable. And secondly, it provides us a basis for economic opportunity for the young person. I would encourage industries, especially chambers as well, to strengthen the system and to make a more comprehensive system of industry-based credentials. Too often we are using credentials that already by their implementation are outdated, and we need to work together, the higher ed system, the K-12 system, and industry, on ensuring that when we have a credential in the system, it truly means that students are learning skills applicable to today's day and age.
We have a very active state-level chamber of commerce and local chambers, and I know a number of them are already involved in that area, but that strikes me as good counsel to take back home. I wanted to focus on school improvement. I'm almost out of time, so I'll be submitting a question for the record to each of you to discuss some school improvement questions. Thank you again for being here today.
Thank you, Senator Young and Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much. And let me start with you, Dr. Steiner. We heard some testimony today from 3 states that have put forward relatively strong plans for ESSA implementation. They all demonstrate a strong commitment to improving academic outcomes for our nation's most vulnerable students. But these are just 3 states. I wanted to ask you, based on your understanding of other states' plans, would you say the other states have put forward plans that are as strong as these 3? That we heard from, and if not, what are you seeing in those other states' plans that concerns you the most?
So the chairman was correct in highlighting these 3 states. They are here rightly because they are exemplary. There are problems across other states that are serious. Some plans that have been approved do not indicate how subgroup performances will even factor into school ratings or the criteria by which low-performing schools will be exited from their improvement status. Some plans are deeply vague about consistently underperforming subgroups. At least one state doesn't specify how it will comply with the very important 95% testing participation requirement in the law. In multiple state plans, the plans for assisting low-performing schools lack all specificity and make no mention of evidence-based practices. Multiple states use percentile or relative rankings of schools in their accountability systems. Thus, they're competing against each other, but not being judged against any external standard. Those are some of the issues. Independent outside groups have generally, looking at all of the submitted plans, regarded them as somewhat mediocre.
Okay, so in ESSA, we created 3 categories of schools for intervention: comprehensive, targeted, and additional targeted schools, 3 of them. We felt it was important to create those 3 distinct categories because schools do struggle in different ways and need different levels of intervention and support. In your review of these state plans, are states meeting that core requirement in ESSA to have those 3 distinct categories?
This is extremely important because Congress quite deliberately chose to define 3 categories, not 2, to expand the reach of states to assist underperforming students. It is unfortunately true that in the case of several states, they're basically using identical definitions for both the targeted and the additional targeted subgroups, thus potentially limiting the number of students in schools that are likely to receive support.
So tell us again why it's important to have those 3 categories to start with.
So in the comprehensive intervention, it's the bottom 5% of the Title I schools. That's very clear. In the additionally targeted, if you have a subgroup that is performing at the level such that if it were the whole school, it would also be in the bottom 5%, then clearly you need to pay attention. But targeted was deliberately chosen as a category by Congress to say, look, you may have a school in which the subgroup, all of them, one of them, has, for example, completely failed to meet a basic reading proficiency, right? It may not match the bottom 5% on all the indicators, but a parent has the right to be deeply concerned about that result. And Congress understood that and therefore designed that category.
Okay, I think that's really important. And one of the most troubling aspects to me of this implementation so far, and unfortunately, the people who suffer here are students.
Right.
Again, the law is not punitive. It is not about punishing schools. Right. It is about providing resources to support students in those struggling schools. Right. So when we don't identify them, as they are required to by law, all it means is some kids are being left out.
Right. Transparency is crucial.
Transparency is absolutely critical. So I am concerned about that. Thank you. Superintendent White, throughout your career, you've demonstrated a really strong commitment to improving educational opportunities for our nation's most vulnerable students. How important is it, in your opinion, for states to implement the equity-focused guardrails that Congress included in this law?
It's not only extremely important, but I believe it's common sense. It's what states should be doing irrespective of Congress's mandates.
Okay, well, that's pretty clear. Okay, thank you. I just have time for one more, and Dr. Steiner, I'll just go back to you quickly. ESSA is basically a civil rights law. It requires the federal government to play a key role in the oversight of states as they implement ESSA. Talk to us about what are the key guardrails of ESSA that the department needs to be making sure that states adhere to.
I think it's several. But most importantly, first, there has to be a clear definition of consistently underperforming, otherwise we won't reach those students. Secondly, we have to be very, very clear about what constitutes the identification of intervention, right? Not to make it opaque by excluding subgroups from your accountability system. I think those are two of the most important. And then third, I am worried about this deep truth about our country, that you can call a standard diploma something that involves millions of children reaching a very different standard through very different routes. As I said, I used my own state as an example in Maryland, where over a third of the children in Baltimore were given the same piece of paper as the standard diploma, but it represented something deeply different. That's what we mean about transparency. If you allow practices like that, you are not promising equality of opportunity of education to all children.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Dr. Steiner, you said several of the plans that you reviewed are mediocre. You're on the Maryland State Board of Education. Would
Yes.
you include Maryland's plan in that?
Speaking for myself, Mr. Chairman, I have been critical of the plan,
As has the governor.
as indeed has the governor. In
Ben
fact,
and others. The
he-
state legislature put some limits on the plan, right?
they did indeed.
Would you recommend the Secretary reject the Maryland plan?
I expect the Secretary to look very closely at the plan. I expect the Secretary to maintain the law. I expect the Secretary to look particularly at aspects of the plan in terms of the state's ability to help students in consistently underperforming schools. The Secretary has a responsibility to uphold the law, and I expect her to do so.
Thank you, Dr. Steiner. Mr. White, you mentioned